Welcome back to the Marching Arts Utah podcast. I'm here today with Marching Arts Creative Director, Jessica Glasgow. Jessica, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Jessica Glasgow, and I am a creative director in the marching arts. I've been in Utah since 2012, and I've had such a great time crafting and creating with many directors and other creative minds.
There's so much that we could start with. I'm having a hard time figuring out where to start, but
of course.
Tell me about your journey from your earliest memories. What got you into this?
Yeah, if we want to go back to like the very, very beginning, I actually started twirling baton at the age of 3. So I'm originally born and raised in Denver, Colorado.
Okay.
Well, technically Golden, Colorado, which is a suburb of Denver, but I always say Denver when people ask. And I started at 3 years old twirling baton for a studio. It was actually called Debbie Stars.
Okay.
So if Debbie watches this, shout out to Debbie. She's like one of my biggest like followers on social media. And
awesome.
I always love when she likes or follows my journey because that's really where it started. So I spun baton most of my elementary, middle school career. And actually probably something that people don't know about me is I didn't actually join color guard until much later in life. So my journey actually started, I was a flute player.
Okay.
So I played in my 7th, 8th grade band and I played flute. And it was actually my uncle Kenny. He's a music plays guitar. He had a music center. He worked at a music store, and it was really fun because I got to go and kind of experiment. Here's all the different types of instruments. What do you like? And it was funny. I ended up picking the flute because it fit in my backpack. So that was kind of how we got there.
No, there's so many people I've talked to that was why they picked their first instrument.
Yeah, I'm like, it fits in my backpack. And for me, it was all about just making sure that it wasn't super obvious to my non-band friends.
Exactly.
I wanted to stay cool, but also I really wanted to play music. So so I started out playing flute, and then from there I went into high school band. And I had a great high school band director, 2 different directors that are still in my life, which is crazy. I designed a show for one of them. He's a band director in Texas, and he's Aaron Allison is his name. I work with him at Channelview High School. Fantastic. And then Tammy Ahmed, which she was one of the very first people who gave me kind of the opportunity to teach as well. So those are my 2 high school band directors, both of them so influential in where I am now.
Well, the fact that you're still in touch with them and actually work with them, that's crazy.
Yeah, they're awesome. I think back to I remember being in 9th grade and I started high school band, and I was playing flute. There was 14 of us too, by the way. So, and our band was only 30 people. So it was not a big band. So it was really a flute band. Yeah. And I remember, Miss Ahmed coming to us and saying, there are 14 of you and you all need to pick something different. You can't have 14
You're drowning out the trumpets.
Yes. And so I had the opportunity to pick a different instrument in 9th grade, and I started playing French horn.
Oh, wow.
And so that's where I spent most of my early years was playing French horn. I played in my college band. I played all the way through high school. And then I got the opportunity to be drum major for my high school band too. So that was kind of another side of me. So
nice.
Yeah, that's where it all started. Just early Jess career.
Yeah. Can you think back to any moment where you first kind of noticed just the shows? I know you were a drum major, so obviously you knew what the show, but was there ever a moment you're like, I don't like how this show's designed. I would rather do it a certain way. Did you ever have a moment where you're like, I think I'd want to design shows? Yeah,
less critical. It's funny you ask that. I actually am one of those people that I'm less critical of other people's art, and I'm more I have this brain where I will be driving down the road and I will see something and I'm like, oh my gosh, that could be inspiration. That could be and sometimes it's the weirdest things too. My brain just thinks in stories sometimes, or thinks in and maybe it's music sometimes that inspires it, but at a very early age, I would be that brain that would just see something and be like, oh, I could craft something really cool around that. And sometimes crafting meant physical art, and sometimes crafting meant, I did, because of baton, part of baton, you do a lot of technical dance training too. So that's part of it. And so I spent a lot of my early career, I would, create a dance recital and then I would set, have my mom and dad sit on the couch and all of my stuffed animals, and then I'd come upstairs and do a performance. So like for me, it was less about being critical of other things. It was more about like, I love to take in art in all kinds of forms. And like, I was that kid that was like, I want to go to this museum and I want to go to that museum. And I mean, we had a membership to the art museum when I was a kid. So like, those were places like on a Saturday, I wanted to go and just take in other people's art. I love to go, you know, to the symphony. That was one in the 5th grade every year in Colorado. The whole 5th grade class gets to go to the symphony. And like, I just remember going and having that be such an impactful like moment for me. So I think of it more like the events that I lived and, but less about, I mean, I was more, when I would watch a marching band show, it was more about, oh, that was super cool, or that was super cool.
Rather than I would do it differently.
Yeah. Or like, or what if they did this, or what if that, like my brain thinks more in what if, but I do remember some of those like very first shows that I saw that were so impactful. Like Pomona High School was a really, they went to BOA every year. W.L. Whaley actually ended up being somebody in my later life who definitely played kind of that inspirational role with me. I was able to have conversations about Pomona High School and how he grew Pomona High School. And that was something I always loved to watch. Like I was that kid who was like, we have to make it back in the stands to make sure we watch Pomona High School. And that was just like being able to experience like that at such a high level. And then being a kid who was not in a program like that. Our program was good, but it wasn't great. And so being able to experience...
And it was really small.
Very, very small. Like I say 30, that seems very small. But I would say somewhere probably about 30 winds and about 10 color guard. So, I mean, and maybe about 10 percussion. So it was a very, very tiny program, but it was such a great experience for me. So
I love that your creative eye is less critical and more like maybe opportunistic or you know, you've always, any time I've worked with you on a project, it's been like, this is kind of the overall idea, the theme, you do with it what you're going to do. And I work really well with people like that. So
I'm a little chaotic sometimes. Like I definitely have that brain that's always thinking and moving. And so I do like to surround myself with people that maybe Peter Bates is a really good example. I always say Peter Bates is the structure to my chaos, and that is real, because there's times where like I will, you know, I want this event and this event and this is going to be cool, and then we need to have these big fans that come out, and like, you know, and Peter's like, okay, so realistically, Jess, like we only have about 3 sets of 16, like, you know, like, so sometimes I always like to call him the, you know, the order to my chaos, because and I think that's what makes such cool products, is being able to say like, this is what I'm really great at, but the organizational side is not always something that comes supernatural. And so having Peter be able to organize it from a drill standpoint on some of my projects has been fun. But there's so many other people like that. Like JC is like that too. Very engineer, very, you know, regimented type mindset. And so being able to like craft with people who are different than you, but also, you know, and same thing when we've worked together, it's been nice to be able to allow you to do what you're great at while also still giving the idea of this is how we want it to be presented.
Well, and it helps to have relationships with people that don't feel afraid of telling you how it is and what they're, you know, some people, and I would consider myself a person that's like kind of anti-conflict. I don't want to like, you know, push people. I don't want to like create problems, but that's something I definitely need to work on, is like just communicating more like maybe bluntly sometimes. But when you it's really nice when you have good, healthy working relationships where, like with Peter, you know, he can just tell you, look, realistically, you know, whereas other people might be like, oh, I just want to do what Jess wants to do.
Right. And if we do what Jess wants to do, it would be way too many ideas for a small period of time. So I always love like having those other people you can bounce ideas off of. Or, you know, sometimes in our activity, like I think art is always one of those things that it's very experimental. And so there are so many times where I utilize other people to say, hey, I had this idea. is this cool? Because like
Yeah.
sometimes it's like really, you think it's a cool idea and then you have time to experiment or workshop it and you're like, okay, maybe it wasn't that cool. Let's erase and start over.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
a lot of that. So
And you said that you played French horn in
Yep.
college as well. Do you want to take us through your college years?
Yeah.
And kind of just what all you did?
yeah, so I went to Metro State University, which is in downtown Denver, and I started out as a music ed major.
Okay.
I discovered very early on that I do not want to be a band director. There are so many things, and I admire band directors. I work for some of the most amazing people, but there's a lot that they deal with that just maybe isn't the best for. I am that creative that I love to, but there's a lot of things that they organizationally, even just, the day-to-day of being a band director that I knew pretty immediately was not for me.
Yeah.
I love the creating part. I actually really do love even just, the concert band part of it. I love the music side of it. I love all of that. I love crafting together. I love being able to work on something with a group of people and create something beautiful. So I love that side of it. But there was definitely a side of it when it came to classroom and classroom management and, all of that I was like, okay, this is not for me. So I did, college for me was finding out that I didn't want to be a band director, which is great.
Yeah, that's super valuable, by the way. Unfortunately, probably costs a lot of money to figure that out.
Yeah. And from there, I decided to really lean into the color guard side of things. I was very, very active in the winter guard scene. So when I started out in 9th grade at Golden High School, and I started winter guard, and then I quickly moved into an independent color guard. So I marched a couple different places in the Denver scene. So I marched Nova Winter Guard, I've marched Signature Winter Guard, and a group called Alchemy. And those were all really, huge part of my college and I would say early adult life. And I ended up aging out of Winter Guard. And then that's when they dropped the age limit, by the way. So you can actually still march to this day. But I actually did officially age out of Winter Guard before that rule was passed. And I marched one season of drum corps at Crossman Drum and Bugle Corps when they were from, we were a part of YEA, which we were from Allentown, Pennsylvania. So now Crossman is from San Antonio. So there's been a little bit of a shift.
What year were you with them?
2006.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I marched in the color guard, which is crazy because that was when I started to really lean into that side of it. And then from there, I did a lot of teaching. So directing different winter guards in the Denver area. Bear Creek, which was one of the first groups that I really spent a lot of time at and I directed. And that was with Tammy Ahmed. So she was my first high school band director.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time working with her very intimately at Bear Creek High School. Great things. Like they did awesome things. They made finals at their state championship, which is a huge success for them. Was able to take them to WGI where they made semifinals, which is also, I don't know who let a 20-year-old take a whole group of kids to WGI, but I was pretty young at the time. But it was so fun to craft and be able to create at that level. And I think that's where I first decided that I wanted to do more of the creative side versus the directing side. I still leaned into it a lot. I taught at Legacy High School, which we ended up being state champions the 2 years that I worked there, which was fantastic.
And is that also in the Denver area?
Yeah. They're from Broomfield, Colorado, so just a little bit north of Denver. But that's where I spent a lot of my college age years is in that area. And just really spending time in the Denver metro area teaching band and color guard. So I did mostly color guard stuff. I choreographed and directed and would do some band choreography here and there. And then I would play a pretty heavy role in the design process. And it worked with teams from all over the Denver area on picking what the show is and maybe giving some influence into the musical selection. But still I was still pretty removed from that process. But was kind of the first time I got to sit in some of those conversations and really get to experience the design from an observing standpoint. I would say that's a huge part of, a lot of people in this activity are like, how do I get to, design shows? And it's a lot of my early career, when I'm talking a lot, it's 10 years I spent observing other people. I spent it trying to just be in the room and listen to what they have to say. I tried to be a sponge in every situation because I was, and I got to be around so many different minds that were crafting. And I spent a lot of time just taking it in. So that would probably be the majority of my college years.
Yeah.
And then 2012, I moved to American Fork, Utah. So then I've been here.
So tell us about that. What brought you to American Fork in particular?
Yeah, it was actually my husband's job. So Dana got a job teaching the percussion here in Utah, which was a really great opportunity for him. And so I did come with, and it was interesting because when I first came to Utah, I didn't teach at American Fork for the first 6 months. So I was just really observing the program.
Okay.
As a fan, if you will.
Did you know about American Fork before you moved there?
Yeah, I mean, not as much as I knew of American Fork before I moved here. But I didn't really, I knew of some of the shows, or I knew of the program. I knew of John Miller. We have a mutual friend. Actually, that was the friend that is the reason why we are here. And when he talked to us about American Fork, and when he came to us and, we had the conversation, I did spend quite a bit of time then studying from the backside of it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Who was that friend, by the way? We don't have to.
Yeah. No, his name is Marcus Brown. He is such a great mind. He actually used to run, I'm trying to think, he had a service that, a company that he ran. And that company, basically their job was to find jobs in the marching arts and then match them and so that was his company that he was running. Great company. And so John Miller had gone to him and said, "Hey, I'm looking for a percussion director." And actually the interesting thing was Marcus had come to us the year before and was like, "Hey, we're looking for a percussion director." And it just wasn't the right fit at the time. Yeah. And then the year later, "Hey, we're looking for a percussion director." And at that time, it just made more sense for us. So
nice.
But yeah.
You said it was about 6 months that you didn't really work. Were you planning to, were they looking for help with the color guard in particular, or with anything else in the program? Yeah.
I mean, so great question. When I first moved here, there was not an opening, but it actually worked out really well that during winter guard season, one of the assistant color guard directors actually, I believe that he had left to go merge Pride of Cincinnati. And so that left a spot that they were trying to fill. And so it kind of fit out really well, that it just worked that I was here. I spent one marching band season at Bingham High School. So I worked with Darren Graber.
Okay. I'm interviewing him tomorrow.
Okay, great. That was my very first experience here in Utah. And it was fun. I mean, it was one of those situations that it was, we had such a great season. It was an incredible season for them. And it was fun to play that role for them. But I kind of knew if something had opened up at American Fork, that's probably where I would want to end up. So I think it's kind of I look back at where I was and where I am now. And, it's one of those things that it's been such I have to thank everybody for the opportunities, because I would not be where I'm at now without somebody believing in me. Right. And so, even when I didn't believe in myself, which is crazy, but also real, right? We all kind of go through that, but I wouldn't be where I am without those opportunities. So I'm super grateful for all of them.
There's so much nuance with what designing a show means.
Yeah.
Do you just want to talk about kind of starting at your time at American Fork, how your career kind of started to progress and branch out?
Yeah. When I first started in 2013, so if we were to talk about Fury year, I really was a support. I was there my main goal was to make the color guard the best that they could be. So I was a support to Tiffany Miller as the director of the color guard, and then also support to the design staff at the time. So we had Wes Cartwright was our artistic director. And then Leon May was there as the drill writer. And so really my job was to help them bring their vision to life. And actually that's kind of how my career started at American Fork, is as I was there to help in any way I could. But really my job was to help them bring that vision to reality. Right. So that's how it started in 2013 with Fury, and then again in 2014 when we did Bad Hair Day. I started to do more of the choreography element during Bad Hair Day, so I was able to kind of jump in and craft, and there were a couple scenes that our original staging didn't work, and maybe didn't work is the wrong terminology, wasn't working for what we had planned. And so I had some opportunities to actually craft and restage a couple events for the band, for the color guard.
Nice.
And those opportunities were given to me by John, which is fantastic. And then in 2015 was the first year I took over the color guard program.
Okay.
And so Tiffany had stepped down as color guard director, and she did such an amazing job, like growing that program and kind of creating a foundation for what it was able to be. So I'm forever grateful for that. Yeah. And so her life was changing, decided that she was going to step down, and that ended up being a really good opportunity for me to step in as the color guard director. In 2015 was Red Sky. And that was probably one of the very first productions that I had a lot more to do with. And so I was able to, what we would call in the marching arts, kind of play like a color guard coordinator or a visual coordinator. And I worked really closely with Keith Dutton. So Keith Dutton is from Southern California, and he actually played our creative director all the way up until 2022. So he was with the program for a really long time. So that was kind of like, became Keith and I really hit it off. He became kind of like my partner in design. And so that era between 2015 all the way to 2022, it really was us crafting together. So he played a huge role in kind of giving the direction, and then I played a huge role in how we implement that with the students being on site. And then it also gave me a playground to start designing. I am forever grateful for everything that Keith has done, because Keith was like that first one that was like, hey, I have this other program. Do you want to help? And
cool.
I have this other program and we'd love to have you help. And so I started I started taking on like my very first clients. I worked with Amador Valley and Loveland High School, and I'm trying to think from that era where I was at, but all these, schools that I was able to work alongside Keith. So we were able to craft together. We kind of found that I would say it's nice to have another person where you can kind of bounce ideas off of. And so we would spend hours and hours on phone calls and Zoom calls and FaceTimes and, just crafting, just creating fun stuff. So, but yeah, that's kind of what gave me that opportunity at American Fork. And that era was so much fun because there were some of my favorite moments of shows existed in that era. And we also went through COVID, which who the heck knows how to manipulate. And it was such a different time for us. And in the middle of all that too, something that maybe not everybody knows, but I also personally in 2019 decided to go back and march Winter Guard again. And so I went and marched IMBU, which is an independent world guard out of Modesto, Colorado.
Oh, wow.
Or Modesto, Colorado.
California?
Modesto, California. Everything's Colorado today, but no, that one is definitely in California. Middle of nowhere, California. And so I got to a point with American Fork with the color guard program where I felt like we were kind of at this little plateau. And maybe not just the color guard, but also the marching band. Like 2019 was really hard for us. We, went to BOA and got so close to making it into finals, but we didn't. And, the Winter Guard program was kind of knocking at that finals door as well. And for me, I got to a point in my own professional career where I was like, I need to learn more. And there's not really a college that you can go to learn more about color guard or about design. And so really, the only way to do that is to, go learn from great designers, go learn from great people. And
luckily they removed that age out thing from the Winter Guard.
Yeah. So at 33, I was 33 and I had 2 kids, and it ended up being a good time in my life because they weren't in elementary school yet. So I kind of justified it personally because I got to spend all day with them Monday through Friday. Like we were, I had that opportunity to spend so much time with them during the day that it made sense that I would fly to California Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and march IMBU. So I got that opportunity. And really it was kind of one of those things that I was like, well, if I'm going to ask this out of my students, I've got to be willing to do it myself. And so I just did it. So that was something that I did in the middle of all of that. And that opportunity, I could not express, like, if anybody in this activity is like, how do I continue to grow? How do I continue to grow? It's like, you really do have to just put yourself in rooms with great minds and just try to soak it all up, learn their process.
Yeah. With that in particular,
Yeah.
what did that do as far as professional development goes?
Yeah.
Like what kind of stuff were you able to soak in and learn that kind of helped you feel more confident with your career moving forward?
I think for me, it was the thing that was eye-opening is learning a totally different process than what maybe I had already experienced. And so, you know, Siobhan is the director of MBO, and she has definitely a different way of crafting than I had ever been exposed to. And it was so organic, and it was so, it was really one of those experiences that being there and looking at, okay, color guard isn't always about 5, 6, 7, 8, and it's not always about the counts, and it's not always about pretty pictures or spinning together. You know, it's really is more of an art form. And I think that was the very first experience I've ever gotten at a world-class level. And I had marched other groups at a world-class level before and been exposed to other groups. And being able to see her process and being able to see how organic it was and how much of I think that this is another thing I really picked up from MBO is that the performers and the people that you cast are as much a part of that process as the design process. You know, we can sit in a room and we can all be like, is this cool? Or what does this drill look like? But really it's the performers that bring it to life. And so there was a lot of performance aspects, and there was a lot of, you know, how do we really feel, or how do we really come across to the audience, and how is this being, like, it's all about a feeling. And I learned so much. Like, we really are the paintbrushes for whoever's crafting.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Siobhan does a lot that I use as a part of my process too is being able to workshop with your performers. Oftentimes we'll take a small group of the cast and we'll spend a moment and we'll craft with them, and we'll have them be a part of it. How does this feel on your body? How does this move? How does this hold your saber here? And how does that feel? You know, and that was something that Siobhan did a lot of, is she wanted to feel how it felt on your body and also how it looked, and then do something in a different way. Like, she would always say something like, you know, don't start here. Like, let's start upside down, or let's do this. Like, it's never like, so many times in color guard, we always start from such a basic position. And so being able to say, like, if it's something that feels natural, how do we take that and do it in a different way? And so that was something that I learned from her, is it was just how to craft in a way that's totally unique for you. And not trying to be, you know, what everyone else is. Like, can't be somebody else when we're not them, you know? And I think that was something that I took away from that experience for sure.
Well, I can imagine it's so different when you're, you know, designing something maybe on a computer screen or on paper, but then seeing it done by the real person, it can be totally different.
Totally. Yeah. And it's also interesting too, because, and positive and negative too, right? And maybe just in a different way. There's so many times in my head I'll have something crafted, and then when you get there and you start to play with it, it's okay, that's a good foundation, but now how do I elevate that? Because it's not, you know, that moment is cool, but how do we make it cooler? You know, how do we take it to the next step?
Yeah.
So
how much of your, and we'll get into your process, but how much of your process kind of changes from the design portion to the execution portion?
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the design portion of it, like if we were to talk about marching band or drum corps, I think a lot of the design portion of it is the foundation. But then once it starts to be taught and implemented and you start to see it in real life, I think that that's the coming to life part of it. A lot of it gets edited. And it's not edited in the sense that like, oh, that's like, we're going to rewrite that. It's not always rewriting, but I do think that, you know, that becomes your foundation, and then everything else that we put on top of it, that's like, how do we elevate this? How do we make this look different? How do we make this look uniquely us? Like, there's an identity factor too that I play with a lot, where, you know, something I'm going to craft for an American Fork would be very different than what I would craft for a Blue Knights, which would be very different than what I would craft for an Amador Valley. Like, there's just, there's also differences, and it's not just the cast, it's also, you know, the on-site educators. You have a lot of different tools at all those places. And I think sometimes when we're crafting, it's like looking at, okay, what are all the tools in your tool belt? And then how do we utilize those to create the best product? Because not everyone has the same tools.
Yeah. So for maybe beginners or people that want to do what you do, it's not a bad thing if your original designs don't always turn out perfectly the first time. There's going to be editing, there's going to be adjustments, and that's okay. That's part of the process.
It is. Yeah, it is part of the process. I also would say, also trust your gut sometimes, because I do think, and maybe we could dive into this a little bit, but I do think a lot of times there's a lot of outside noise in the world. There's a lot of outside noise in crafting.
Yeah. Anything creative.
Yeah. And you can, it's hard because there are, podcasts and blogs, and there are platforms where other people can share their opinions. And so I think a lot of times too, like, while I say, like, yes, you can change it and craft and like be okay to allow that to grow. Also trust your gut sometimes, because we're in an activity that's highly critical. Like you walk away and you have, 7 to 8 judges tapes at every show, and all of them are extremely critical, because that's what they're being paid to evaluate your production.
And that's not even taking into account the people on social media that are being critical. Well, tell me, you were telling me while I was setting up, you're like, I have to mute things on social media. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So a lot of times we just live in a world that's highly critical. Everything, and sometimes I see this in my own life. It's like trying to like remove that out of even my own process. Like I catch myself in my own life judging things, right? And you're like, and so one of my things that I've tried to do, especially in the last several years, is really appreciate and love things as they are. Now, online and social media can be super loud. And so there are times in my crafting process that I will mute things. If we're in the middle of the DCI season, I will block anything DCI, or in my case, Blue Nights, or, if there's something that I'm highly related to, I will try to block those, just those words, right? So that they don't come up on my own personal feed. Nothing that I'm not opposed to hearing other people's opinions. And sometimes I love it when other, creative minds come up and talk to me about the show or want to learn more about the production, whether that's American Fork, whether that's Blue Nights, whatever that is that we're producing. I just also like to tune out the noise sometimes. And that would be like my advice, especially if you are early on in your crafting process, is there are times where it's so great and you're going to want and you're going to welcome all that feedback, but there's also times where it's okay to mute it.
Yeah. Well, there comes a point where it's productive or it's not.
Yes.
And a lot of times, you're getting opinions from people that aren't really qualified to have opinions. And so you get into that world of, well, which opinions do I value? You know? And so that's, the difference between somebody coming to you in person and wanting to discuss it. That's such a different, amount of value that you can take in.
Yeah.
But when you're involved in such a creative thing, and it is a very personal thing, because you're it's vulnerable. You're taking what's come from inside of you and presenting it to the world.
Yeah.
And if you're distracted by hateful comments, it just isn't going to help you. It's not going to give you any value.
Yeah. Well, and then there's comments that are critical that I actually don't mind those as much as just the ones that are just have to say something that doesn't really come with, I hate the color pink. Well, great. Yeah. It's
sounds like a you problem.
It's more like a bias versus like an actual thought, or, I wish, we wore marching band uniforms. It's like fantastic, like that's great. So, but some of those I'm a little easier to tune out. Some that come with a little bit more information, sometimes I'll find myself reading them, but I
saw a lot of that, especially during the DCI prelims and finals. Just flooded with people like, we need to go back to the 90s or the way we did it. And, this isn't even DCI anymore. It's just, it's theater. And it's funny. I was talking to Don Peterson, who you would think that a man with as much experience as he has would maybe think a little more along those lines. And he was actually like, the first time I saw DCI, I was like, wow, there are so many different types of people that we can include in this. And this was probably in the 70s or the 80s when he saw this. So think of how far it's come,
Yeah.
But the theatrical side of what DCI is now, and marching bands in general, I think has allowed for so many more people to join the activity.
I think of us less as marching bands and more of like performance ensembles now. Like I feel like, I mean, yes, that's where we originated and that's where we came from. But I mean, even look at how far marching band has come even from the very beginning and how we started, more military-esque. And now it became a marching band where it was more like halftime performances to something that some of us do, which is more of an art form, right? So like everything has evolved for sure.
As someone who works in the high school marching band world and the DCI world, can you talk about the influence that DCI has on the high school world? And DCI adopts a lot of things and then high schools adopt it. Is that sort of how it's been going? And could you just kind of talk about the influence that the DCI has on high schools, especially like the BOA stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I do see kind of DCI as, I mean, we inherently have older performers. And I do think that high schoolers often are the biggest fans of DCI. So like when I'm watching DCI and I'm in the stands and I'm looking down at the audience and I'm seeing the people who are reacting, 9 times out of 10, it is your high school bands that come in a group that all sit together that are excited to experience what's being produced at such a high level. And so I really do see DCI as being kind of like the professional side of what marching bands tend to do. There are different criteria within the judging community. So like when we're crafting for BOA, I mean, inherently we have shorter shows and there's obviously woodwinds and there are some things that are quite different and you have different tools when you're designing for DCI versus high school. But I do think that oftentimes when I sit in design team meetings and I'm talking with, a band director or a staff that's on site and I'm trying to get out of them, what it is we want to say, how do we want to say it? And what is it that you want to do with your program? Oftentimes they use references like, I really liked when the blue coats blank, or I really liked how SCV started. And I really liked the color palette of blank, so there are times where we use those as kind of, I would say inspirational stepping stones. And then, I mean, obviously you'll see the influence of everything that you see on DCI is sold the day after DCI. So you'll see the Mandarin's props again. You'll see that. So there's that side of it too, where you'll actually see some of those. I mean, I think I've actually designed for and still see to this day the jagged line prop, from Blue Coats. And so it's, I actually worked with a group in Texas. We did a Corella DeVille show and we had the jagged line prop. And then, so there are props that you will see that will be used and then they'll be used for seasons and seasons and seasons.
Yeah,
so,
that's awesome.
Yeah. So it kind of gets like passed down and then somebody else will buy the jagged line prop and create a show around it. So very influential.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the differences. There are differences, not only between, the guidelines for what a show can be, but can you talk about the differences in designing a show for a high school band versus a DCI group?
Yeah. And to be fair too, there are several types of high school bands that we'll create for too. Because it's so crazy because even UIL, which is
in Texas,
they have different criteria than BOA, and BOA has different criteria than UMEA, which is our Utah circuit, which actually is becoming more and more similar. So it kind of just depends on what the criteria is, who you're designing within. And then I also think that there's just some small differences in, there's some obvious ones like show length is going to be very different. There's Texas, you can't go over 8 minutes. BOA, you have a 10-minute slot. And drum corps, it's like you have up to 14 minutes. So like there are some like wide ranges in how long you have to say it, which for me kind of changes in what we want to say because you have more time to develop a thought. You have more time to produce something. You can utilize length of phrase as something that we're utilizing within a production. And so a good friend of mine said recently, it's like we have we have all this time to really decide what we want to say, and whether it's 8 minutes, whether it's or less than 8 minutes, more than 8 minutes, 14 minutes. And so I think as you craft within those time limits, those frames, you really want to look at a show arc and what those limitations might be. And then in addition to that, like there are some more specific criterias that you would go through in a high school band, like, like we want to have a woodwind feature by this moment in time. Like it's more important how we say hello and goodbye. There's a lot of things throughout the show process that we'll want to make sure that, I hate to say it this way because this makes it sound so like mathematical, which show design shouldn't be, but there are a lot different boxes that you would need to check, right, throughout the production. If we're looking at it from that perspective too, you want to make sure that you're checking those boxes early on in the production so that the end of the production is really just solidifying, right? Like you don't want to have to wait until the last, the 8th minute to have a woodwind feature, right? Like that probably wouldn't go to your advantage. And so there are some things that you would, traditionally do within a show to make sure that it is going to quote unquote be successful or check all of the boxes, right?
Yeah.
I hate to say it that way because then it takes away the art side of it. It takes away the crafting side. The cool thing about what we do is there's no right or wrong thing that you can do. There's 100 ways that you can do X, Y, and Z, but there are also some things that you probably should do, especially in high school. High school becomes a little bit more, I would say that there are more formulas that we use to craft a high school show than we necessarily have to in a drum corps world. So,
well, you were talking about the structure for the chaos.
Yeah.
It's sort of the math, the checking the boxes, I guess, is a structural thing.
Yes, it is.
And it's just a matter of making sure that it doesn't, overwhelm the creative side of it.
Yeah. Well, and there's sometimes though that I ask myself, like, why do we have to have a ballad hit? Do we? Like, is there something that says we have to? Or like, one year at American Fork, we did an opening hit and we didn't use woodwinds. And, I thought it was fine. That was, but it was a risk,
what year
right?
was that, by the way?
That was the Red Show. So the woodwinds are on the props and we had the singles, Johnny, the saxophone soloist. And the whole opening hit, there was no woodwinds. And I
didn't even notice that.
Sorry, woodwinds.
Oh, that's funny.
But they served a visual purpose, right? Like in that moment, it was really, there was a set design element that I wanted to change the set while it was moving, which we don't often do because, especially at schools, we don't carry any alternates at American Fork, or if we do, it's a very limited number. Oren is great at making sure that every kid has those opportunities to be a part of the program, which I absolutely love, but it does limit us when we're crafting because oftentimes, in a big Texas group, you'll have alternates who can help move props, right? Like that's part of being, and it is a part of their process, whether it's, they consider them JV performers or, but they will play a role in the set pieces. So for American Fork, I have to craft a little bit differently sometimes because if I do want the set pieces to be a part of an effect, so meaning moving at the same time as we're playing, somebody's got to move them. So that year it was the woodwinds and it was kind of fun. We were able to craft things for the woodwinds around them and on them, and they were very much a part of the visual element of what was going on.
Yeah,
but
just not playing.
They didn't play.
Yeah. When you get a new client, what is the first thing that you do in your first conversations with that client?
Yeah, this is a great question because I think I do a lot of calls with clients that it ends up not necessarily being a perfect fit. And so one of the things that I always talk about when I'm having that first initial call is really getting to the bottom of what they're trying to achieve. Because oftentimes people will call me when there's a problem or maybe there's a change in director or, and so really trying to understand like what it is that they're trying to do with their program. Like what are the goals? What are your obstacles? What are some of the things you do great? And then really getting an insight into that program. Sometimes it's the area, sometimes it's the performers. We'll dive into what they've done in the past and what's their process been in the past. The cool thing about what I do is my process actually is super different for every program I work with. And I think that that's what makes it so unique. Sometimes band directors will come to me and they'll be like, here's the keys to the car. Like, run, you know.
Jesus, take the wheel.
Yes, and that actually is like really like that's Oren. Like that's oftentimes like a lot of times that is Josh too at Cedar Valley. Like they there are times where they're like, you tell me. Like and it's fun because those types of situations I really get to, it's more about I really get to take a single vision and bring it to life. And then there are times where we will craft and it will be a group of educators and the band director will come up with a show concept and it will have more to do with maybe their individual goals or where they're headed this year. Or, you know, sometimes band directors will come to me with an idea and they'll say, hey, this year we really want to do a show about blank, you know? And then it will be up to me to bring blank to life, right? In my own unique way. It's funny because I sometimes think like I don't really have a style. Like my style is very adaptive to what am I, you know, it's very different from school to school or program to program. But I will sometimes get people that will be like, hey, are you working at blank school? Because I saw them and it really looks like you. And I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I do have more of a style than I'm really aware of. I had a parent of ours say that, I think it was my first year working at Maple Mountain, and they're like, are you working at Maple Mountain? Because it looks very much like you. And I'm like, oh, I guess they do have a little
That's
bit
pretty
of a style.
cool though. Yeah.
But yeah, it's very much like, what are the tools? I mean, I think I talked about this a little bit earlier, but I really do try to dive into like, what are the goals of the program? And then like, what are the things that you do better than any other group in your area, you know, and really try to dive into what they're best at. I always like to say for a high school program, we take the things that we are really, really good at, and we want to showcase those in as many different styles and forms and ways that we can. And we want to take the things that we're maybe not the best at or that we're still growing at. And we want to make sure that we hide those, right? Like we don't want to advertise like, hey, we're really great at, you know, at dance or a specific style of dance. So let's do a show that has nothing to do with that. Like I do find a lot of times like that's where like if I'm looking at a program from the outside in, a lot of times when you see a season and it's super successful, it's like it's kind of the harmony between all of those different elements. And then when you see a season and you're like, okay, that didn't feel like them or something must have changed. If you dive really into the process, I guarantee you it's because they were trying to be something else, you know, like, so, or trying to, you know, well, we were really trying to go for blank and, you know, and sometimes blank works at, you know, a specific group, but doesn't work at another one. So, finding your own unique identity within like the tools that you have. Sometimes those tools are also like your rehearsal hours, like how much you're able to put into the product. It comes down to like your staff, your on-site staff. Like if your on-site staff is very good at getting the students to do blank, then you're going to want to lead into that. You know, you're going to want to lead into what they're best at too. Cause, you know, if everyone is, you know, if you're able to take all of those I'm best at and put it all in one production, that's when things are really successful. So
nice. You come up with, you know, so much of this, I guess you could say abstract stuff that's based on concepts and ideas, like what is the message you're trying to send versus like, I want the color guard to be doing this specific move, you know. How much of your design gets into that actual physical, you know, nitty gritty detail of what's actually happening on the field?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say a lot. So I do think from like a very zoomed out perspective, like when we're first talking about a show from a holistic standpoint, very little. But then now we're at the process, and especially like where we're at right now, we're almost into September. Now it kind of becomes more into like, how are all these elements coordinated together? What does that specific moment look like? So it does get very zoomed in as the season goes. And all of that starts from a single direction too, which I think a lot of people, the pure amount of focus to each element, like you have to be very, very zoomed in to be able to say, okay, yeah, this is, you know, this specific form is put this way so that we can highlight this individual performer, and that performer is going to do X, Y, and Z for those 8 counts. Like being able to have all of those different elements happen at the same time does take a high level of coordination. And that's where it gets a little bit trickier, because that's where it's me coordinating that down to sometimes a visual coordinator or a color guard coordinator. And then those people would coordinate that down to the next staff, you know, making sure that, okay, on this specific count, we need to have blank, or on this 8 counts, we do need to have some sort of a ripple from one side to the other that draws our eye into blank. And then the coordination piece with the music that's going on, whether it's a sound design element or, if, you know, that's going on at the same time. So I would say very specific, which is like the hardest thing because, you know, every program has its own process. And so I'm, you know, the more I get to spend with individual programs, the more I become a part of that process. It becomes more organic because then people know, okay, this is when, you know, this is the GE focus at this exact moment, and this is how we're going to create it. And this is my element that's going to help with it. Versus like the very first season working at a new group, it's a lot of teaching the process. And then as you continue on the process, then, you know, it will do itself. Right. So, and there are some seasons, ironically, that just, and sometimes it's the music we pick. Sometimes it's the design we pick, that those things just happen a little bit more organic. And there are some seasons where it's like trying to create a single moment takes a lot more. You know, I one of the years I think about so specifically related to Utah is the Andy Warhol show for American Fork. That show ended up being something very special. It took a long time to get there. And so like that one is one for me that was, you know, there were so many times that I was like, is this going to work? Or this isn't working. Or, you know, and then I see Oren out there with the tarps and like all of the elements. There was a lot of risk in that show from what we had done in the past. And so it did feel very overwhelming in the process. I'm very proud of where it ended up, but that show in particular was probably one of the harder ones to bring to life. And a lot of that had to do with the design. We were trying to be quirky. We were trying to be different. We were trying to, you know, we had a lot of ideas at the same time. And some of that is organizing all of that. Some of that was thinning some of it out. When you look at that production at the very beginning, and then you look at that production at BOA, we actually did a lot of thinning out some of the ideas. We took away some, you know, you'll see, we took away the hats out of production. We put them back in. We took away the plumes. We put them back in. We took them away. Because it's a lot.
And that's just the hats.
That's just the hats. But it was a lot of like experimenting. There were shows that you would have seen all the tarps being pulled out. And then by the time we got to BOA that year, we only pulled out 3 individual tarps. Because it became a big process. It became more of a transition. And then people are watching the transition and they're watching what's fully happening. And so that one was a lot of puzzle pieces. So getting into the like really, really zoomed in details, there was a lot of that.
And was that the last year that Keith was involved with the design? That was actually my first year doing it 100% myself.
Oh, gotcha. So okay. I mean, not 100% myself. I have a great team, but
just you mean not with Keith?
Yeah, that was the last year. So that was our very first year to do. And I believe, trying to get all my details and facts right, but I believe that was also Peter Bates' first year writing the drill. Yeah. So, and he was writing, I actually think Leon wrote that drill and Peter was helping in the process. There was a really great connection. Leon is an amazing human and he invested so much in the education of Peter. And it's such a cool process to watch. Yeah. It's kind of weird when you're training your replacement, right? Like that's kind of a weird thing, but Leon did such an amazing job with Peter. And so watching that progression happen from, you know, them doing the drill together to Peter doing the drill with some of Leon's help to in 2024, that was the very first season that Peter did the drill on his own without Leon at all involved. And that was also the year we made finals. So it was like such a special story to watch, like Peter's progression as a designer in the activity as well.
So the point where you've decided you're going to work with this client, what comes, what is your process as far as selecting a show theme? You know, is it based on maybe visual inspiration that you've had or music? What do you kind of go to for that?
This is a great question because oftentimes people are like, where do you start? And it's hard to answer that, but also I want to say I start with whatever inspires me at that specific moment. So after I've met with a client and I kind of have some insight into what it is that they want to say, or what it is that they want to do, or maybe where they're going. Then from there, I start to craft like, okay, I have 8 minutes to do blank. What is it that I want to bring to life in those 8 minutes or 14 minutes or whatever it is? It's interesting though, because a lot of times my inspiration comes from just living life. And I think that that's where what makes shows unique is, it can come from a human experience. It can come from a visual aesthetic. Like sometimes you'll see something in weird places too. Like this is where I tell artists, like, be willing to accept art in every form. Like, I mean, I have taken pictures of wallpapers in a hospital bathroom before. Like I have, tacky art that you see in, the Marriott's, different rooms or, and it's not always the thing. It's zooming in on a detail.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I really like the way that, the lines are here. And then we bring out, whether it's a texture or a form or a piece of art or it's an experience. Like sometimes I've started shows with a human experience or an emotion. Sometimes I've started shows from something very tangible, right?
Yeah.
Like, and a lot of times that does have to do with a program. A great example of this is Maple Mountain. They were very specific on that they wanted their shows to be, we kind of got on like a character theme for a minute and we were really living in our best life. So we had a Tin Man show and then we went from Tin Man to Wonka and Wonka to Mary Poppins. And we were kind of living in this like character based and it was great. And then this year we're taking a little bit of a left turn for them. And it was so much fun to be able to do that. And McKay was great at, this year for them, it was actually an idea that it's still very much in their aesthetic, but it's not as zoomed in on a character. So, and it's a show I've been wanting to do forever. It's been something like, when I'm crafting, a lot of times I'll have a show that I will, hey, this could be really fun. And then I'll workshop it. Maybe I'll draw something, I'll sketch it, I'll come up with a color palette, I'll create a Spotify list, I'll start to like play with different things. And then I keep those in kind of I would say a notebook, but mine's all digital. So I keep those in a folder in my iPad, and those are things that I'll go back and visit. Or sometimes I'll workshop a show for a specific client. Hey, we're going to do a show about blank, and then we'll move away from that. So I'll still have that piece that we workshopped, and that could then become a puzzle piece for somebody else. But I always say, keep yourself open for any art. Like it's not about the thing that you pick, it's about how you present it. So a lot of times people think like, oh, we got to pick the very best thing. And it really isn't. Like if you zoom in on some of the most impactful shows that you've seen or things that impact you, it's not really about the thing. Like we're not all like, we love atomic bombs, right? For Boston, right? Like, no, it was how they presented their boom show, like it's different things like that like it's not the thing. Like the thing is like, it's what drives it. Sure. It's the vehicle that you decided to choose. It's the paintbrush that you decided to use that day, the car you got into, whatever it is, but it's how you bring that to life. It's how you want to present it that I think is more impactful, but yeah. So I always tell directors, like I use trash cans a lot, as I don't know why, but I'm always like, we could write a show about this trash can here, and it could be really cool, but it has nothing to do about the thing. It's just how do you present it? What do you want people to walk away from? How do you want them to, audience to take it in? And it's not always about the best crowd pleasing show. Sometimes I like shows that make you lean in, that you've gone and seen a movie before and, you don't walk away from a highly impactful emotional movie, like clapping and screaming, right? Like you're sitting there and you're like taking it in, right? You're very like, what did I just experience? Right. So I also want to like remind people that it's not always about getting that like standing on your feet ovation. Sometimes it's about the moments that make you lean into. So nice, I know that was a lot to get to how you pick it, but I think for me, like it's kind of just whatever is inspiring you at that specific time, and then putting it, how does it, and don't limit yourself either. Like you don't have to start with a idea. You don't have to start with a title. I'm the worst at titles, by the way. Like oftentimes, like there are shows where I don't create a title until like, they're like, hey, we really have to order t-shirts.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so I really have to put a name to this. And then there are shows that I'm like, there have definitely been shows. Spot On is a great example where I started with a title.
Yeah.
That show, I think I talked about this in a different interview that we did for American Fork, but that show actually came from a judge's comment. We were in a critique situation, and I was talking with Mike Anderson, and a judge in this activity is great. And we were talking about American Fork specifically, and how do we take the next step? And for us, it really was, how do we make an impact at BOA? And he said something to me, it was the Red Show in a critique. And he said, you just have to be uniquely you. You guys are American Fork. And right now it really is spot on. Like, this is great. What you're doing and how you're presenting it. And I was like, that's it. Like, I don't know why from there, it was like, I left that meeting and I really held on to those terms, spot on. I was like, okay. I knew from the day we walked out of that meeting, and this is like middle of the red season.
Yeah,
the next show is going to be called Spot On. So,
wow.
And sometimes that happens. Like I have a handful of things that I'm excited about presenting. And if it doesn't work for one group, it will work for another. And it will be interesting how they present it. So, yeah.
Are you usually the first person that starts the whole process of creating the show? For what I mean by that is, have they picked out music yet? Have they done anything before you get started?
Most of the time, no. So most of the time and sometimes music is a part of my process. So like this year at American Fork, it very much, it was actually a painting that was inspiring for the show, but it did come from music. The music, obviously, I don't know how much, I guess we can say it now, it's out there, but Swan Lake is like, it very much was inspired by, it was a painting that I saw in particular about what it would be like to envision Swan Lake from underneath the water. And so that was kind of the impactful part of this. But we can't do Swan Lake without using Swan Lake. So, but that obviously is inspired by music, but it sometimes kind of depends. I have definitely joined a process before where a band director has said, hey, we're doing a show. Actually, a great example, my very first season at a group in Iowa, it's called Davenport Central. They had music, they had a show concept, they had it all that they wanted to do. So they had a very specific idea. And then my job from there was to bring that to life, right? Okay. How do we want to present it? They already had a lot of the elements picked. That's actually very rare. And that's not a part of our process there anymore, but that was where they were at in that point of the season. Yeah. But yeah, it kind of depends. Rarely, I would say most of the time it does start on my desk or, there are some design teams I work with. I keep bringing up the American Fork thing, but American Fork and Blue Knights, like we have a larger design team in both of those areas. So for American Fork, oftentimes I'll have an idea. And what will happen from there is we'll meet with a smaller group of people. So we'll meet with Steve Vento, who is our music arranger. We'll meet with Colin McNutt, who is our percussion arranger. And then Peter Bates was involved, Oren was involved, but we'll meet in a small group of people. And actually this year we did it right here in my living room. Oh, okay. And so we'll do kind of like a retreat weekend where we'll sit down and we'll, I'll have an idea. We'll have talked through like, what are some of the things that we want to say within those 8 minutes? And what is it that we've liked that we've done before? What is it that we could do differently? What is it that we want to say, right? And then we'll start with a specific idea. And then from there, it will just kind of snowball into other things. We'll listen to a lot of music. We'll, watch a lot of videos if that's something that's inspiring us at the time. Yeah. There was quite a bit of like Instagram reel type media that we consumed, especially with the Swan Lake being kind of a theme. And so we were, and it's not always like we're going to compose this piece. It's what are the arrangements that we can find, and what did we like about how that arrangement changed this melody? Yeah. So it's also about finding like unique things within something that is known, right? So Swan Lake being something that's so known, you'll see a lot of variations on how that melody is played. So, but yeah, oftentimes it does start at my desk and kind of trickles down from there, but it doesn't always have to be like, sometimes people are like, well, it's your idea. And I'm so like, I'm a huge person that's always like, what is the best idea in the room? And what is best for those performers, right? So like, sometimes it's not my idea. You know, there's many times we'll sit in a room and we'll start with a specific thing, and then that will snowball into something completely different. And what I love about that process is that it would be completely different if the humans in the room are different.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
You know, every time I'm in a room and we start crafting something, it's like that product is so unique to the 5 humans in that room. And then when I'm in a different room, it's like it changes based on those 5 or 6 humans.
That's cool.
So,
yeah.
And then there are times for some marching bands where it very much does feel a little bit more single-handedly me, and then I pass that down. So, but yeah, that's kind of the process.
What do you personally prefer? Do you like, I mean, you're a collaborative person, but do you enjoy having, you know, full creative control as well?
That's a great, I would say no. Yes and no. I do like the single vision idea. So I kind of I think of it more like a funnel. Like
Okay.
I really like at the top, you know, like it to be like throw in all the ideas.
Yeah.
And then it kind of funnels through that single voice or those single, like I say single voice, but when I say single voice, I mean the whole design team.
And what comes through as a single voice, but it's from everybody.
Correct. Yeah. Because one of the things that I see oftentimes in programs that are really successful but can't get to blink, can't get to that goal, a lot of times it's because we're so afraid to pick an idea. And I always say there's 100 different ways we can do it. We've got to pick the best one for us. That doesn't mean your idea is bad. That doesn't mean your idea is bad. And I think sometimes taking that human emotion out of it too, because there are times where you'll work with a team of people where they're like, well, I gave 100 ideas and you didn't use any of them. And it's like, well, those 100 ideas helped me get to the one that we did use, you know? And I think sometimes it's hard for people to see that. But also, if we were to say yes to every idea, that would be the most chaotic band show I've probably ever seen in my life. So I do like the idea of it funneling through a single lens, but as much as I can get on the top end of that funnel, and like I said, inspiration comes from everywhere. Like, you know, you have to be open to receive it at every moment. Like, and that spot on one is such a great example because I mean, I didn't walk into that critique planning on walking out with next year's show, you know, like you don't walk in saying like, tell me what I should do next year, you know? So I just think being open to that, but the single funnel is something that I think is really important. You know, sometimes it's hard for band directors. They do end up being kind of more of that controlling personality sometimes. And I think it really is hard for them to hand somebody else the keys to the car. But I do have to say, like, you know, my experience with working with Oren has been so great, and so many others too. But it is nice when he's able to give me the keys to the car so that I really do take care of the show. That allows him to take care of so many other things, you know. And so some of those, you know, when you look at some of the programs at the very, very top, or you look at some of the programs that are kind of leading the way, oftentimes it really is everyone being very best at their specific thing. And then all together we get down the road, you know? You know, I think sometimes there are some people who are technicians, and you know, their job is to really, really make sure that every part of the technical element of that show is coming through. And I think sometimes we have like this negative, like it's like, I'm just a tech, you know, I've heard that saying so many times, and it's like, those people are just as important, you know, like it's like you're the person who's going to ensure that those rifles are going out on the same count and the rotation is beautiful and they're all catching on the same count and it looks great. And like that to me is just as important as all these other elements. And we have to have all of those pieces of the pie to get down the road together. And I think sometimes we lose, you know, value in some of those things that happen every day. Like I think of Michelle and what she has done for the woodwind program at American Fork. And it's like, she is the only reason American Fork can be so successful is that we have such great educators to back it up that have been there from the beginning, you know, that have put in the time to like, and I those people I value and want to hold really close to my process because I can't be successful without all those other pieces. You know, if there's not a great color guard technician and there's not a great color guard director and there's not a wonderful brass, you know, caption head and all the brass individual instrument educators, it's like the product would not exist, you know?
Yeah.
There's no one human, no matter how great they are at writing marching band shows, that can write a marching band show without all of those elements, you know? So it's just so crazy that keeping those as a part of our process, like those people are what makes, you know, what makes us all succeed, right?
Yeah. So how did you get involved with the Blue Knights?
Yeah. Okay. So a couple of years ago, I had a couple of drum corps call me, and I started kind of just having exploratory conversations. I really, really avoided the DCI activity because I'm one of those people in my life where like I don't know how to commit without committing 1,000%, and so I really have protected my own family time.
Yeah.
I've always had young kids, and so getting involved in the DCI activity had to be the right time in my life. It had to be a time where my kids are they're growing up and they don't need me as much, and they are at a place where I can really commit. Because if I'm going to commit to something, it's going to be everything I got.
Yeah.
And so a couple years ago, I had actually it was probably about 3 years ago, Blue Knights had called me, and we had an exploratory conversation, and it didn't go anywhere. I ended up not accepting any positions. It just didn't feel like the right fit for me at that point in my life. And at that point for my own personal kids. And so, you know, I decided to not explore that conversation any further, and it was totally fine. It was what it was. It was totally fine. And then 2 years ago, I get a call from the same person, and they wanted to talk again, which is great. And so we sat down and we had a conversation, and that conversation, you know, then explored a few more times, and it ended up being a really good fit for me at that place in my life for what I was able to commit. So I started out 2 years ago at Blue Knights as the visual coordinator. And that role quickly evolved, and I started doing more with the design team. And it was such a great season the first year. It was really cool to see that develop.
Real quick, what is the difference between a visual coordinator, and I know it's going to differ from program to program maybe, but what were you doing as a visual coordinator versus what you normally do as a creative director? Yeah,
a visual coordinator in this particular atmosphere, and in every one you've kind of identified it can be different, but at the Blue Knights it was more I was a voice in the room. I was a member of the design team, but I was really helping I don't mean to say somebody else's vision come to life, but I wasn't necessarily the one like crafting the main idea. I wasn't the funnel person. It wasn't through my lens. It was, you know, and so being able to craft with that room and really being able, and the cool thing about the Blue Knights process is it really is a collaborative process. Like our lens is quite large, if you will, because everybody, you know, has an area that they're best at. But the main thing that I really helped with was I did a lot with the aesthetics. I did a lot with the visual coordination of events. So whether it was the corps, the guard, the drum line, like how all those events are working towards one specific goal or what we were trying to say at that moment. Coordinating with all of the different choreographers. So we had, you know, a different choreographer for the winds as we did for the color guard, as we did for the percussion. And so making sure that they all knew what was going on at a specific event, and then what that event was leading to, and maybe who had the focus at that event or where we were trying to draw our eyes. So it really became more of, there's two sides of that. There's a crafting part of that, and then the other side of that is more of the coordination side of it. So, so that's kind of that role that I played the first year at Blue Knights. And it was a little bit of a weird situation because we had an artistic director who did step down at Blue Knights. So we were kind of missing that artistic director role, which wasn't necessarily a bad thing either, because all the people in the room, like we all were very specific at what our element was that could make that show kind of come to life. But we didn't have like somebody that was like leading that role because they did decide to step down. And so it kind of changed, I would say, our trajectory of the show, because we had this idea, and then we took that idea and it definitely took a different route than I think it probably would have. Who knows which one was better, like there's no better or worse. So it did take a kind of a different route that season. So, but I do feel like, to be fair, I do feel like the process was actually quite similar to the year before. So, we were kind of missing that voice in the room the year before. And then this year, it kind of just evolved into something that was still very, I would say everybody really did play a role in that process. So it might have been initially an idea or a thought that I had, but then how that thought grew up, I guess, if you will. I oftentimes with the design team, so they'll laugh if any of them listen to this, but I often like, you know, I utilize like a child's progression as like our show sometimes. And it's just weird. But like, I was like, you know, the idea came from one place, and then we have a toddler, and now we have a, you know, so I utilize like life as a way to show. But it's always funny because I'll say, yeah, like that was the idea of like back when we just found out we were pregnant, and now we have a toddler. So things are different, you know. But people always laugh when I use that analogy because
it's funny.
It is true.
It makes sense though.
Yeah, like, you know, often the thing that I would say, like, this is also just like if you're new to the activity and you're trying to step into design, allow yourself the creative ability to make a left turn, you know, allow yourself the creative ability to say, hey, yeah, that idea was really cool. But we're going to try something different, you know, like, cause there have been so many times where I feel almost handcuffed to an idea. And I knew, like, your gut instinct tells you, like, hey, yeah, that was cool, like, back when you were originally talking about it. But, you know, things have evolved now, and it's not as cool. And allowing yourself to be like, okay, yeah, that was the original idea, like, but this is taking kind of a different meaning, you know? So allow yourself that creative ability to say, you know, this is different now, you know? Yeah. And sometimes different can be, you know, we started out and the show was about something, right? It was about, and now it's definitely taking a different meaning. Maybe there is an underlying meaning that you're leaning into a little bit more. Or maybe there is a metaphor or something that is kind of becoming more of the thing. So just allow yourself the room for shows to grow and evolve. Cause I think sometimes in the process you find yourself like, well, no, we said this, we said we wanted blank. And it's like, yeah, but do we? You know, do we have to do it that way? Like, it's okay if we don't like that anymore. Like, yeah, that was cool in November, but now we're in April and the show is definitely a little bit different, you know? So.
Well, that is a great question to ask for progress to happen in anything, really. Do we have to do it that way? Are we only doing it because we've done it before?
Right.
You know, I feel like that's how things move along.
Yeah. Yeah. And be willing to, you know, oftentimes I try to take the emotional side out of it too. This is something I've got, you know, in my life from Scott Chandler. He wrote an amazing book. And one of the things that I took away from this book was, you know, utilizing, like, the show is almost its own person, right? And so utilizing that in the sense that, like, you know, what does the show need? You know, at this moment, the show needs us to blank, or the show needs this, or, you know, and then you kind of take that like human emotion out of it. Like, because oftentimes we will get, you know, tied to an idea, or it becomes part of our own identity. And it's okay to say, no, the show needs this now, or the show needs this now. And so really looking at it from that perspective of how do we take that, you know, human like attachment to it, and it really is its own person, and what does it need right now, you know? But I think you're right too, like being okay to say, I always love to have deep conversations with other artists in the activity, because oftentimes, you know, I'll show something to them. Actually, this happened really recently to me. I showed a picture of the Blue Knights costumes to another creative mind in the activity. And one of the first things that they started doing was just asking questions. You know, and it was a picture I was very proud of. I liked the picture. It was totally, and this was a very just conversation about a specific uniform, right? We're looking at it and we're looking at the uniform. And then he actually started asking me questions about the lens that the photographer was using, and how did we get to this photo, and what was the process behind it. And it was interesting because everything that he was recognizing or taking in or noticing in the photo were, one, things I had never thought about before. And two, he was exactly right. You know, like there were so many things that I was like, okay, so tell me why you would have chose this lens. I actually don't know anything about photography, so I don't know what lens, but, you know, when I start to recognize like, oh, these are the things I'm seeing because you use this specific lens, I was like, oh, interesting. I never thought of it from that perspective. So I think like being open to having those conversations, it's not a personal thing. Like I didn't take that personal, like, oh, because this person had questions about this, or maybe didn't like a specific lens or how we used it. But it also opened up my eyes to, this is great, but how do we elevate it? Yeah. You know what I mean? I was really proud of that photo, but now I'm asking myself, okay, well, what lens do we need to use? And how do we set this up? And what, by putting, the props in this order and then having the performers it was for a uniform reveal, like, okay, is that the right way? And is that how we want them to see it? And is that how we want them to view it? But I think being open to having those conversations really just elevates the product in the long run.
Yeah, for sure.
Because everything he said was exactly right. And I still love that photo. It doesn't take away that I love that photo. Yeah. But given that critique, I probably would have done it a little different. So it was just interesting to see those perspectives. Because, through somebody else's lens, you're going to see that a little differently. So
yeah. Well, and then you need to figure out how you accept or take critique. And I'm sure that's something that you've had to deal with a lot in your career. How do you deal with criticisms and feedback? Sometimes it's not bad, but how do you personally handle that?
Yeah. Well, I'll get into a funny story because I think people like this and relate to it. But, we talked earlier about the social media side of things. Everybody will have an opinion about everything. And here's the other thing. It's okay. They're allowed to. Yeah. And so I think just allowing yourself to, if you're willing and able or at a point in your process to accept some of that feedback, some of it comes whether you want it or not. So, you might be in a critique situation. Obviously, you're prepared for it. You might be walking through the stands and someone sees that you're wearing an American Fork show or shirt and wants to tell you about the show. Yeah. I had a parent of another Utah group stop me in a parking lot, and they knew nothing about my involvement in American Fork. And they just wanted to stop me because I was wearing an American Fork show and tell me their favorite moments, you know? Cool. And so it was such a cool moment for me because it is okay just to take that in, it's okay just to, and sometimes you'll have that exact experience and they'll want to tell you everything that they disliked or, and I think just being willing to take it, but also not make it like change what you do or who you are, I think is super important. In my own personal life, we actually have a name that we use. And if this person ever listens to this, I'm so sorry. But there is somebody online whose name is Contra Fart, and they like to comment on it's on an online platform. But oftentimes they'll be highly critical of some of the things that I'll do. And it was funny because it just became this name that we utilized. And so now if anyone has any negative feedback to share, we'll sometimes use that as a terminology like, well, Contrafart said they didn't like your uniforms, or Contrafart said he doesn't like the color pink, or so if Contrafart is listening to this, I do appreciate their comments, but sometimes it's people just want to say how they're feeling, and there are platforms out there for them to do that, and so don't take it personal. Like that should not change what you do, and and for every one person who doesn't like what you're doing, there's 10 out there others who love it. And so,
unfortunately, you don't hear as much from those people, and the ones that you do hear from are more loud, I think. And
sometimes those can be like such like impactful situations. So like I got stopped at a rest stop in the middle of Ohio. I was driving back from DCI this year. And somebody was wearing a Blue Knight shirt, and we talked to them and just, shared with them that we loved their shirt, right? And this person was such a big fan of the Blue Knights. And so having that conversation with somebody in public, though, not that it had to be in public or private, but having those conversations that are just organic, I guess, like, it was so cool to hear about how much he loved the Blue Knights, and, and he talked about the show last year and the things that he loved about last year and then this year. And so it was really fun connecting with a fan like that. I think those situations happen maybe more organically than the louder ones, but I just think being open to receiving and hearing it. And, like I said, don't let it derail who you are. But there are often times too, where I'll get a very, what could feel negative or feel heavy, or you can take personal. The great example of that photo, like I had a couple different ways I could have taken it. I could have taken it in a defenseful way, or I could have taken it in a way that was like, okay, well, why would you have used a different lens? Oh, I would have used a different lens because of blank, blank, and blank. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right. So I think being open and not taking everything personal, you know, sometimes just diving into like, why don't you like those uniforms? Well, I don't like the color pink. Well, I can't solve that for you. You know what I mean? So like, that's one that you're not going to win. But like, I do think being open to hearing the criticism sometimes really will also evolve your process if you're willing to take it in not a personal way. You know, it doesn't change that I like that photo, but it also doesn't change that the things that they had to say about it could have elevated it, you know? So I think sometimes as people, we take criticism so personal. And oftentimes in this activity, it's really not personal. It really is, you know, it really could elevate it if you're open and willing to hear it.
I think when it comes to this creative stuff, like, you know, when it's really your heart that you've put into it, it is really difficult to not take it personally when you feel that you're being criticized. Is that something that you've had to get better at, or have you felt like you kind of naturally been okay at like handling it? And I guess what would you say to people that have a harder time handling it?
For me personally, it kind of changes throughout the seasons in my life. So like there are times where, and it's probably directly, like if we were to dive into like the psychological element, it's probably directly related to what I'm going through in other parts of my life. Right. So, as far as my own willingness to be able to receive it. But I do think like the biggest thing is there's opinions out there that you're going to want to keep really close to you. And those are the opinions of people that, maybe have helped get you to where you're at, or maybe there's somebody that there are so many artists out there that especially in the marching arts activity, that I love to watch what they do. I love to see what's next. I love to see how, you know, they would have done it. And so I think making sure that you know who those people are in your own atmosphere and keeping those people really tight and really close to you and being able to tune out some of the other noise, allowing it to exist because you can't control whether it exists or not, but also tuning that out, I think is probably my biggest advice. Yeah.
I was wondering if you've kind of given us a kind of the 30,000 foot overview of what it's like to design a show. I was wondering if you could take the show that you designed for the Blue Knights in 2026, The Sky Between. Take us through the origins of it, the ideas and how things formed and just how the whole show was designed.
Yeah, that show is actually a very unique one. So I'm glad that you're asking about it, because The Sky Between actually did start with more of a human emotion, which is actually very rare for my process. Oftentimes in my process, I'll start with a piece of art, or start with the texture, a color theme. I'm a very visual oriented person. So a lot of times it does come from the visual side of things, but that one in particular actually did come from a human emotion. And so the show particularly is about what it feels like to ascend. So, oftentimes when we're reaching for a goal in our life, and I did go as far as when we were talking with the performers and we were talking about the show, we did ask them individually to come up with what that meant to them. But that show really is about, trying to get to a specific goal and what it takes to get there. So it does, oftentimes we start from the very ground, right? So we started with the first movement that was grounded. And then what does it feel like to kind of go through that like ups and downs, right? You have a moment of success, and then, something will change. And so we really utilize that with the turbulence. And then what does it feel like to actually get to that moment and transcend, or maybe it is hit a goal. And so that one is interesting because it really is a human experience. It really is a human emotion. And we utilize clouds as kind of like that visual imagery for, the process. And how we started that was, what does it feel like to ascend? And I kept relating that back to the feeling that you would get when you're sitting in an airplane and you're looking out the window. You first take off, right? You're on the ground, then you take off, and you go through turbulence often, and the kind of the feelings of anxiety that you get throughout that moment. It was so much fun because I did have the 17 hands kind of in my back pocket. That's the Alfonso piece. And I love that piece. It's been something that I've wanted to use a lot, and I didn't really know where, and I didn't know how it fit into any of the process, but utilizing that specific piece of music was super impactful for this process. And we kind of started with, that was the very first piece of music that we selected as a design team. And then that really fit that turbulent moment and the anxiety and like what you feel like when you're kind of going through turbulence, if you will, in an airplane. The show is absolutely not about airplanes, but kind of that feeling that you get. And then what it feels like when you finally break through the clouds, right? You kind of get to see everything. And so that was kind of utilizing that experience and how it felt. And the process for the Blue Knights it really is a collaborative process. So we work with I work with such amazing people. I work with Noe Gomez on the visual side of it. He really does play a role, not only just in the drill, but how everything visually is presented. I always joke around, he's my other partner in design, but we really do kind of utilize that visual side of the production. We have our program coordinator, Jed Weeks, who plays a huge role in the visual side and the musical side. And then we have such great musical designers. We have Tanner Leonardo, Jeff Osdemore, and then Leslie as well, who is our brass arranger, who's absolutely fantastic. I think the coolest thing about the Blue Knights design team is these are have become some of my like best friends, right? These are people I love to surround myself with. And the process, because of, just everything that we've done together as a team, it's so fun to like watch where it got to, right? Watch it succeed throughout the season.
That's so cool. Yeah. Can you talk about what it's like to be in those big arenas and seeing your show in its best form at the end of the year?
Yeah.
And just witnessing it come to life that way.
Yeah. There's actually two parts of this for me, because I often say I don't, and I mean this in the nicest way, but I don't write shows for the audience, right? Like that's not, obviously we want the audience to enjoy it. They're all going to get out of it. If you're crafting something that's spectacular, they're going to love it. Right. So, but I don't craft because I want them to love it. I don't want them to jump out at it. I don't, I'm not crafting with them in mind. But when we get to some of those bigger arenas, some of the things, obviously it's so great to, be a part of that experience for the performers. It's so great to see the human experience that they're going through, just even throughout the warm-up process, and then getting on the field and then living in that moment and watching them really pour everything that they've got into something that they've been working on every single day, for the however long that season is. But the other part of the piece that I always like to experience is I normally do take a moment and watch the audience take it in, because it's really cool to see what people react to. And, reaction's not always clapping and jumping up and down, but sometimes it is where they lean in, or they have those moments where you can tell that they're, experiencing it in maybe a more of an emotional way. But I do like to watch the audience, and I like to watch them take it in. So I would say, as an artist, I think the coolest part about seeing that production in such a big arena is really seeing the reactions from the people experiencing it. I love the fans too. I love, a specific memory I have from last year was when walking into San Antonio, seeing all of the light up clouds. So everybody had these LED handheld clouds that they were holding up. And that was just a cool experience for me, walking in and seeing that, and seeing all the parents so excited for their kids. And sometimes it's like walking on the field that kind of brings those emotions up. Yeah. So yeah, those are some cool memories I have from that season.
That's awesome.
Sometimes it will take a long time. I think one of the things that maybe not everybody realizes, but for DCI example and for Blue Knights, we start now for our next season. So I am in the process of designing 2027 as we speak. And I don't think everyone kind of realizes that this is something that we live with for an entire year. So the process of getting, even just to spring training and to move-ins, and it's kind of been something that we've held close to us for 9 months at that point, so it really is such a long process. And so I think sometimes people are so fast to well, what's the thing? And what are the colors? And what is this? And what is that? And really allowing yourself the space to, I do have a color theme in mind, and I do have an idea in mind, but also allowing yourself space to let that evolve, I think is something that, you don't always have to stay with an initial idea. And so allowing it that space to evolve. But another colleague of mine said this to me recently, and it's like, we spend 11 months on this product and we have 14 minutes to say something. Like, what is it that we want to say? You know, you only have 14 minutes and you're going to spend 11 months crafting it or 12 months crafting it. And so what do you want to say in that 14 minutes? And I think that's such a unique way to look at it is we have, you know, you have sometimes the biggest stage in our activity at your fingertips or you know, you have this biggest stage here. And what do you want that to say in 14 minutes? So
no pressure, right?
Yeah, no pressure.
You have quite a few clients now. How do you manage your time and compartmentalize everything? Because it's such a creative thing, but you do kind of have to focus. How do you handle all of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have times of like, I think I have different processes for different seasons of the year. And so what I mean by that is, you know, as we head into November, December, that's when we start crafting and for marching band. So talking specifically about marching band. So November and December, it's like we start to craft the project. And this is where I'm really, really in that creative process. Some of it is a little bit in the debriefing process and some of it is in that creative mindset. That's where I have to be like the most protective of my time because you can't really choose you can choose when you're creative, but allowing yourself the space to work, you know, longer hours if you need to, or today I'm going to give myself that break that I need, you know, allowing yourself some creative breaks and allowing yourself the space to create when you are, when you do find inspiration. One of the things in my process that I always like to do is when I am off and running and this just might be the way that I am personally programmed. I can get like hyper fixated on something. And when I allow myself the space to do that, you know, I have an idea and I have no idea who the idea is for. It's just something I'm loving right now. I maybe was inspired by something, whether it's music or a feeling, and I just allow myself the space to craft and create. And then I can take that and I can file it away. And then that's what I can utilize as a tool later on. Like, oh, this group, they really do love emotional based shows. They really have a tie to blank, blank, and blank. Wow, this experience that I had would be a great fit for them. So allowing myself the space to do that and allowing myself the space to create when I am in that creative space. But then part of my job is very much like, there, you know, I do, you know, I joke about like the type C personalities, you know, you have your type A, you have your type B. I really do have to be that type C where sometimes I am allowed to be chaotic and I'm allowed to create and I'm allowed to have, you know, this creative side. But then there is the side where it's like, okay, I need the percussion to be done on March 1st. I need this person. So there is an organizational side of it that I have to run. And some of that it really is highly administrative. Making sure that you're hitting deadlines. And it's not just my deadlines, but trying to manage a creative team's deadlines is one of the most difficult things you can possibly do. And so I really do. I try to manage not just my deadlines, but then the trickle down effect of, you know, I've got to make sure the first thing on the puzzle is, you know, making sure that the music arranger, the wind arranger is working through their process, right? And in order to do that, they have to be set up for success. So, you know, after we have the thing and we know that we're doing the show about the thing, we really do focus on a kind of a musical flow. That's kind of the next step of the process. If you were to put it into like a process, sometimes those happen at the same time. So sometimes I've already crafted maybe the color or costume, or I have an idea, or I have colors in my head, or I'm playing with other things. But in order to get the music arranger started, they really do have to have a musical flow. And that's where we take either that 8-minute show, this 14-minute show, and we divide it into segments. I often like to write in scenes, and I'll utilize 7, 9, 10. Like it just kind of depends on the length of the show. But when a music arranger starts, they would have basically a musical flow from me that would say, you know, these are the 9 different scenes. This is how long each of those scenes are. This is the source material for those scenes. This is what we're doing in those scenes, because that makes, you know, that's going to change. If they know the visual intent behind what we're trying to achieve in those scenes, they can craft that in a different way. And then, and then they can take that and then they can start to put the structure behind it from a musical standpoint. But there's a deadline for that. And then they'll pass that to, the percussion arranger. And then there's a deadline for that. Different programs will have different processes. So like for the Blue Knights, oftentimes there's not necessarily a hierarchy of design process. So like if there is something that's more visually oriented, like we might craft the visual side of it and leave the space, and then the music side might be added in later. So it's kind of like the hierarchy of what takes that moment. If it's a percussion moment, the brass arranger is not going to start that moment. It would be the percussion, right? Yeah. So it's kind of like the hierarchy of that moment kind of would dictate who would write first. A lot of high school bands don't follow that same kind of map, if you will. We don't have as much time, and sometimes there's a little bit less people involved. So you might sometimes you'll have the same wind arranger as percussion arranger, or your percussion arranger might do the front ensemble, the battery percussion, and the sound design, right? Like, so they might do all three elements, where at some programs, those might be 3 people. So it kind of just depends on like what program it is and then how that process works. But yeah, part of my job during that part of the season is managing the process, which I do have to share. That's probably my least favorite part of my entire job. Because I want to allow people the space to be creative, but also like, if we don't have a show, no matter how creative that product is, it doesn't matter, right? Like we still have to get the kids the product in time. And, but also like, I think that this has been a huge conversation we've had in Utah. This is actually very specific to Utah, is the learning the show process. When I first started at American Fork with John Miller, it was very normal for us to do the entire show at band camp. Like we left Delta, Utah, and we had the entire thing on the field, top to bottom, and choreography.
How common is that?
It's not common. It's not. I used to always say that that's like the Utah way. But that honestly is not necessarily the process.
Maybe it was the John Miller way.
John Miller. It worked for him.
John told me once that that's the only way he could get to sleep at night, was knowing that the show was all on the field.
I could see that. Yeah. And there's so many different for my process. And I think marching band has evolved since then. Yeah. Like it used to be much more like dots, choreography, music, right? And there wasn't a lot of choreography. Choreography was only like when you held. And now it's definitely turned into more of a production. There's a lot more, like when we go into actually like today we're starting learning some dots, and then you start with music and dots, and then there's the production elements of it. So there's a lot more producing that goes along with these shows than there used to be. And so I think that the process just inherently will take longer. Yeah. And there's something to be said from an educational philosophy that if you learn it right the first time, it really will set them up for success. And so I think slowing down that process a little bit, and then making sure that everyone, is learning it right and everyone is accountable for that. I think there is something to be said that then we're perfecting something that, is already, the foundation is set, versus, throwing it out there, having people hang on, and then having to go back and reteach it in some aspects. So, I mean, neither way is right or wrong, and they both led to great success. But I do think we have definitely slowed down the process here in Utah. And from my perspective, that has been very beneficial. It's, we understand that, what we produce in September is different than October, is different than November. And I think you really see, I think programs have really evolved since we've kind of slowed that process down, and allowed for the time to actually produce, individual moments, and things have become a little bit more complex, which has been fun on my part. So
what are some things that maybe most people don't know about that you think would be helpful for them to know?
I mean, I think sometimes like when people think about like a designer role, like oftentimes there are designers that are part of like actually producing things. So like they write the brass score, they write the wind score. And I think maybe a misconception is I think sometimes people think it all comes from one place. And so, like while the guy, I am so proud of all of the products that we've put out there, it really is a we thing. And so I think maybe that might be a misconception, is that it really does come down to every element. And I think there's the other side of it too, where, there are those band directors out there who might be looking, every year it's like looking for the next thing and the next thing and the next best, designer.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that, I think being realistic on the tools that we have and then how to get to that next step. It's not always go hire the best designer out there and your program is going to succeed. There are so many elements of that puzzle that are so impactful. I talk about, the Blue Knights thing a lot, and, it's crazy because I don't think that everybody realizes that, people driving your semi are, that they are just as impactful as, the people designing your costumes, the people who are, standing in front of your color guard every day. And so I think sometimes like we forget about all of the pieces that make the puzzle. I think one of the things that I found to be so, I don't want to say different because everybody does have band parents, but I think one of the things that I was a little bit shocked when I got to Utah is the involvement of band parents. I came from the state of Colorado, which we did have great volunteers, like really wonderful volunteers. But, oftentimes it were volunteers of current students. They were volunteers of performers that were physically there. Yeah. And when I got to Utah, I think one of a misconception I had was, the American Folk program is really ran by volunteers from many decades of excellence. And, I think back to, a couple of people who have like super impacted my life. And I think Troy Mace and Cynthia Brown, and like, they didn't even have kids in the program when I first started, at American Folk. And so, when I just remember having a conversation with Troy Mace specifically, and I was asking him about his children, like, tell me about your kids, and he was telling me about his kids, and, they were all adult children. They, adult children having children of their own. And I think for me, I didn't realize the ecosystem that had been built around, the American Folk program, like, and not just American Folk. I think this exists in Utah as a whole. I've seen it in many other programs I've been involved in Utah. And that, I guess that's a misconception I have had coming in, is just like the pieces of the puzzle and how, it's not just a current thing. It really has existed over decades. And, and since then it's been handed down, and there's Troy, we'll say Troy retired from his volunteer job. And Dusty Miller then stepped in and played a huge impactful role until Dusty retired from his job. And then, it's like, it is one of these things that, it's not just based on like your kids currently being in the program, but it really is something that, Cynthia Brown has played a huge role in the program, and her kids have kids, and, they haven't been a part of it since, Madison was in the color guard when I first started teaching for a year, and so now she teaches the color guard. So being able to see it from those different perspectives, Allison Dean obviously is one of the most influential, and it's just so cool to see all of these people and, the impact that they played while their student was in American Folk, but then also for the decade after, I think what gets you into American Folk is probably either a past experience or your student, but then it's one of those programs that you just can't leave. Right. So we don't want them to leave. Yeah. We need them all to stay. So.
Yeah. In the 14 years that you've been part of the marching arts in Utah, how have you seen the activity change and evolve?
That's a great question. I feel like the activity changes every year. I think that we've talked about this a little bit earlier, but like, I think the impact of what's going on around us, like Utah used to be very, I would say closed off, right? Like we didn't have many groups that were traveling, and we didn't have many groups that were being influenced by what was going on outside of our state. And I think, since the, social media has played a role in it. And since the exposure of what other people are doing outside of the state, I feel like every single year I just see the state continue to evolve. Oftentimes I have, of course, people say, well, you can see like, American folk does kind of sometimes set the trend. But I don't think it's the case anymore. Like, I think it's set by everybody. We have, Westlake is traveling outside of the state, and Cedar Valley is traveling outside of the state. And, there's been other programs that have gone to the California Regional recently.
Green Canyon's going to Grand Nationals as well as year.
Yes. And
this year as well.
Yeah.
I said as well as year.
No, that's okay. I just remember there being a time where it was, it was really only the American Folk program traveling outside of the state. And so to see, and for competitions, right? Like there were people traveling for other things, but to see people going outside of the state for other competitions, I think that we're all being influenced by the world around us. And social media has played such a big role in that because, something goes viral online and whatever it is, and we might find inspiration in it, or we see a show concept, or we see a color scheme. And so I think every year the state of Utah is changing. But since I first started here, like even just like terminology, and as we continue to, our educators are growing and evolving. Like I remember there was a time when, this is just a funny story. I walked into the American Folk Band room and they had Eminem on the schedule. And I was like, what's M&M? Like, I'm thinking we're going to go eat M&Ms or something, but no, it was short for marching and maneuvering, which it's like visual, right? Like that for us, I was like, oh, so like, okay, so we're doing basics. We're doing visual basics. Is that what we're doing? Like, this is visual time. Like, but it's different terminology that has just evolved since, I would say the John Miller days, but I specifically remember that moment.
It's funny, Dana mentioned that.
Did he? It was very impactful for both of us, because I remember us both talking about marching and maneuvering and just being, because I had never even heard the term before. Like
that's how old it is.
And so, the other thing I remember too, and maybe he shared this in his podcast too, but I remember like the red band pants.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. He did talk about that.
I remember walking through the band room for the first time and like seeing the picture, and like it might have been a moment but I just remember being like, please tell me they don't have red pants anymore. Like, it was just one of those moments where like, it just felt, when we first moved here in 2012, it did feel a little bit dated for where the activity was as a whole. And I think that throughout the next 5 years, we kind of dipped our toe in some of those experimental things. And then I feel like we really dove in and we started doing some things that were very different. I even think getting rid of the Aussies was a huge thing, that was, there was literally a Facebook page that was in protest of that. So it was just funny to me that we look back at that time. And I remember having conversations with other people who were kind of at that same point in trying to dive in more to the creative part of it, and just being like, how did you get your parents to be okay with no more Aussies? Like, how did you, and I remember having those conversations with other directors from other states and just saying, how did you get to a point where your parents were okay with this, or not, and not just parents, it's community. And it's not the parents' fault. It's just change is hard. Change is hard for everybody. And so then, towards, the next 5 years was really just trying to dive in. And then there became a time where I feel like we went from diving into like, it was expected. And then it kind of became our trend. And then, maybe I had a little bit of a phase in there where we broke a trend here or there. And, now I feel like, and in the next 5 years, we'll have the same conversation and we'll be talking about the things that we're doing now and how that's evolved. And I just think the whole activity as a whole has just been, I think we're all influenced by whatever we're seeing, whether it's, the media, the world we're living in, art that's going on around us, but all of that impacts how we present ourselves. I do a lot of watching, other creative arts too. Like I love to, I've never been a competitive dancer, but I love to watch competition dance. So like sometimes I'll, and that's like a form of art I'll take in. And, there's also college dance teams that I love to watch too. So yeah, I don't know. And being able to like see that and then also change that for what we're doing and then watch the influence of that. But yeah, I think we'll always be changing.
Yeah. Well, on that note, where do you see things going in the future? and specific to Utah, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think for Utah, the biggest thing that I see happening is I feel like people will be more comfortable with maybe taking some risks. Whereas it won't be so avant-garde, if you will. Like, I do think that, moving away from traditional band uniforms was a huge one. But I could see us this year at American Fork, you're going to see us take a more traditional route than we've ever taken before. So I do think that there's some ebb and flow to the way we design. I do think that there's some throw the fishing out there and reel it in and then let it go out and reel it in.
Yeah.
So I do think there will be some experimenting that will happen and at all levels. I think people lean a lot into different color palettes, and we're being more okay with, going away. I remember when we went away from school colors and how controversial that was. And and now it's I don't see American Fork ever being in red and black again. So I think that we've got to this point where it's okay to be different.
Yeah.
So
Jess, thank you so much for your time today and kind of educating all of us on your career and everything that goes into creating the marching arts shows. We look forward to seeing what you do going forward.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us on the Marching Arts Utah podcast. We'll see you in the next episode.